If you're watching this video, it means that it has been, at some point in time, Valentine's Day. And today, I want to talk to you about romance. Languages. These modern descendants of Latin can be found throughout the world. There's a chance you're able to speak at least a little bit of one yourself, and something I find really endearing about them are their shared words. Whether you're discussing a horse or a window, honey or an arm, you can be confident that there will be at least a vaguely similar word found in several of the other languages. However, you might have noticed something unexpected. Who's that trying to join in? Over 1,000 miles away from Rome, in a corner of Europe that was only ever temporarily influenced by Latin speakers, we have a language that can also join in on our game, who can also discuss not only horses, windows, honey and arms, but books, people, churches and fish. It's not included in any Romance language lists nor shown in any of those maps, and for a good reason, because this is not a Romance language. So then, where did all of these words come from? Just how Latin is this language? And finally, who's that? This is Cymraeg, also known as Welsh in English, which is fitting for today because in Welsh, English is called Saesneg, borrowed from the Latin Saxonica. And even if you are familiar with Welsh, even if you speak it yourself, in my own experience, you will likely be surprised to learn just how much it has been influenced by Latin. As I said, the Romans didn't have a very robust presence in Britain and definitely not in Wales, but regardless, their influence is there. I've already shown you several words that share a common ancestor with these Latin-descended languages, but I wanted to know how many of the most common words in Welsh are borrowed from Latin. Or even from anywhere, since if I was already looking at Latin, then I might as well find out about how much of your average Welsh conversation is borrowed from somewhere else, either the neighbours or 2,000-year-old men, the two kinds of guys you don't want to run into in the hallway. So I went to work. Step 1. Has anyone already done this and can save me theoretically 3 days of going crazy, not just looking at common Welsh word etymologies, but also figuring out what counts as a common Welsh word in the first place? They have? Oh, that's great. I was wondering why this first step was so ludicrously long and worryingly specific. Let's have a look. A 2010 study by Jelena Perina looked at the frequency of borrowed words using a Bangor University list of the 1,000 most common words in Welsh. And this is amazing, but I had one slight, entirely personal issue. Some of these words were surprisingly frequent according to this list. Words like school and education and to learn were surprisingly popular according to this study. Up there with number, middle, and main, which I thought seemed a bit odd. I found a different Bangor word list, and that, for example, puts the word for school 4 places below the word for good, and 2 below the word for need. 2 words which I felt were surely much more common than that. The 2010 study looks at 1,000 words, so in that case this very small issue of are these 3 words really as popular as they seem isn't relevant. It doesn't matter if Ysgol is listed as the 50th or 500th most popular word. If you're looking at 1,000 of them, then you're going to cover it at some point. But I wasn't doing that. I wanted to aim for about 300, a small study of the most commonly used words by Welsh speakers. So how common a word supposedly was much more important in this case. So, to be more certain, I wanted to make my own list. That way I would at least have something to compare these other ones to. Which brings me on to step 2. How? I needed a corpus of Welsh language texts, but if I wanted to check the statistics on an average conversation, then I'd have to be very picky. My first port of call was Wikipedia Cymraeg, which I figured would provide a great list of the most commonly used Welsh words if I ran some articles through a word frequency analyzer. but a problem quickly emerged. Whichever articles I chose would inevitably influence the word frequency. For example, when I included the Welsh article on the USA, suddenly the words for United and States became extremely common. However, before I had to figure out how to fix that, I had a better idea. The talk pages, which, appropriately for this video, are identified by a borrowed word. These were filled with conversations about the articles in Welsh, which I figured would be perfect by making a short list of the most common words. So I once again got to work copying and pasting them into a word frequency analyzer, finally ending up with a 1,800 word master list. And as you may be able to tell from the name of this document, this was my 4th attempt. Now that this was complete though, I spent the next couple of days going through each word one by one, deleting duplicates, abbreviated words, mutations, and obvious mistakes, checking the etymologies with the Prif Cymru, the same dictionary used by the 2010 study, until I was finally able to answer this question. How Latin is Welsh? And why? %. By my calculations, your average conversation in Welsh will consist of about 16.3% borrowed words, 10% from Latin, 4.7% from English, and 1.7% from either medieval English or French, which can be difficult to tell apart. This differed from the 1,000-word study a little bit, which was entirely expected since their survey was much more detailed and our word lists were completely different. For example, ysgol, school, was very popular in the 2010 study, yet it didn't appear even a single time in mine. In the end, this study calculated a borrowing of 8.7% Latin and 4% English, slightly less than what I came up with. This tells us two pretty interesting things then. Firstly, despite all the Latin borrowings I showed you and the multitude of English ones that exist, Welsh is, on the whole, remarkably original, if that's the right word. Most of the words that are used are not borrowed. Secondly, despite the many obvious English borrowings like map, possible, fashion, and status, your average Welsh conversation is 2 times more Latinized than it is Anglicized, and it's 6 times more Welsh than it is borrowed words. And this was a bit surprising to me. I expected the borrowed percentages to be much higher, and honestly, I expected the borrowed words from English to outpace the ones from over 1,600 years ago. But they haven't. So that brings us to our last question. Why? The answer is the one it has always been, the cause of every problem you have ever had. Roman Emperor Tiberius Claudius. In the year 47, the Roman legions arrived on the shores of Britain, hoping to make a more permanent inroad this time, and they were successful. Emperor Claudius would soon make a dramatic entry into the Roman city of Camulodunum on the back of an elephant. But the rest of the conquest would not be easy, and for the area we are focusing on today, it took the Romans another 36 years to subdue. But once they did, they remained in charge for about 331 years. That's a very long time, about 13 generations, and this provided us with the asteroid that created this 10% sized crater in the Welsh language. Because while the Romance languages may be descended from Latin, Welsh has many similar words due to borrowing them from the Romans during their occupation. According to the linguist Gert Carling, languages borrow words for 2 reasons. The first is if they don't already have a word for something new, which clearly doesn't apply in our case. Hopefully. The second reason is due to prestige, meaning that the language of the common people tends to borrow, even for concepts and objects they already have words for, from the language of the ruling class. Over the course of 331 years, the Britons seem to have adopted many words from Latin from the ruling Romans, which leaves us with the 8 to 10% chunk of Latin borrowings in modern Welsh, the largest descendant of the Brythonic language. Which means, in all, that about 10% of your average conversation in Cymraeg will consist of words borrowed directly from the Romans, double the amount borrowed from the neighbours. I'm sure there's an interesting study in there about why, despite controlling Wales for twice as long, the language of the ruling class of Rome has historically been absorbed twice as frequently. but I think we should stop here for today. The Welsh Parliament is called the Senedd, from the Latin senatus. The First Minister, the Prif, has half of their title derived from the Latin primus. The dictionary I used for all of these etymologies today, the Geiriadur Prifysgol Cymru, half of that name is borrowed from Latin, ator, primus, and scholar. History is alive inside every word you speak, no matter what language it is. You'll be using words evolved from ones formed thousands of years ago, ones adopted by your ancestors when they encountered something new, or borrowed from their rulers over time. The history of Cymru lives in Cymraeg. The influence of the Romans, the Normans, and the English can all be seen, and so can something else. Something very, very important. Despite Rome controlling Wales for half as long, their influence is double that of the English language. You would expect Cymraeg to be 20% borrowed words from across the border, but it isn't. It's nearly 90% original. In spite of everything, it's still here. Thank you for watching.